the latest. Thank you for all love and support. I appreciate you. Oh, sorry about my voice. Africa, the power is moving. Things are changing. Those who wish that will continue to be down are falling themselves. The same people who are going around saying that without them we can never survive, we are seeing them collapse. This is the best time to be alive as an African because the world has changed. What we never expected to happen is actually happening today. But the problem is, majority of the Africans haven't realized that. We still find excuses to support the oppressor because these people always speak in parables which we don't understand. We expect them to open up things the way they are to us, like they do when it comes to Africa, giving propaganda and misleading us. So when things are even coded to the African, we still do not believe it because we do not hear these people saying, some of us to decode whatever that they are saying. Why is France now begging Africa for survival? Power has shifted. France is on fire, is on its knees. The giant whatsoever that we see is no longer the way it is. France has lost power. France has been kicked out of its colonies. France is now weak when it comes to the European Union because the role is supposed to be playing. France is not getting that. There are a lot of things that we are not aware concerning these people because of how they project themselves. Africans don't believe that France is no longer the France we used to know. So people will even come and defend and say that their economy is still doing well, it's not doing bad. But the people are telling us that France is no longer France. The ordinary citizens.
Macron is the symbol of those deep contradictions that, to use this word figuratively, he can only escape the political guillotine for some time. It may take 1 or 2 years, but I think that ultimately he will be forced out of office or he will see the wisdom of leaving office. The contradictions are so deep that he cannot afford the luxury of just hanging in there because sometimes hanging in there is not the solution. But he may also want to stay in power. And if he does, I think he's going to be confronted with situations that are not going to be very pretty. It's true that the world is going through a very tumultuous period. And what one sees is that the world is moving towards a multipolar world. It is no longer the European countries that are the hegemons. There are new players who are emerging. The Russians are emerging in terms of international relations, as are the Chinese in a subtle way. But because you pose a very direct question about France, let us begin with France. France must be understood in the context of her colonial and neo-colonial past and posturing. When France was present in Indochina, in Vietnam, and in those parts of the world, and of course present in Africa, primarily, France literally governed in a manner that was designed to disable her colonies. That is how you understand the emergence of the Fifth Republic in 1958 with Charles de Gaulle. And as regards the African states at that time, the referendum in 1958, which was designed to appear to grant independence to African countries, but to retain control, was in itself a clear indication that France did not want to let go the colonial project and therefore initiated and continued to perpetuate a neo-colonial project. The only country, that, of course, that voted no at that time was Guinea under Ahmed Sékou Touré, which, as we know, was then punished very heavily. The Algerians were also very determined in their opposition to the French. So after the 1958 referendum, France literally controlled her colonies and extracted her minerals, controlled their banking, controlled their currency, and pretty much they were external territories. And of course, then after the World War II, which I prefer to call the European Tribal War, what then happened is that many of these colonizers, France included, started to lose their luster and to lose their grip. And that grip was lost even more because the United States became the new hegemon. So when you look at France today, you see a France which, courtesy of our colonial past, accommodated people from different parts of our colonies. You find very large Algerian communities, very large Senegalese communities, very large Cote d'Ivoirian communities. And these communities cannot be ignored because of the demographies, and they are threatening the French indigents. And that is why you've seen that since the emergence of the administration of Macron, there have been very major difficulties, and these difficulties must be understood at several levels. One, you have a France that has lost her access to minerals in her former colonies. Two, you have a France which is diplomatically weak. Three, you have a France which within the European context does not play the role that she thinks she should play as one of the key players. You have a France where the internal contradictions are threatening every administration. And in that context, you must see the emergence of the right wingers such as the Le Pen, both the father and the daughter. So all those contradictions are coming to bear. And because they are happening during the administration of President Macron, he is seen as the architect of the failure of France. And seen from that perspective, he himself is beginning to reassert himself. And what way to reassert yourself than to use the crises that have emerged since your administration? And there are several crises. Crisis number one, that you have had the emergence of changes of power which are extra-constitutional in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina Faso. And what have they done? They have said, you are no longer going to take our uranium in the manner that you did. We are no longer going to have France or French as our only language. We are going to choose who to work with, and we are no longer going to be obedient servants within La Francophonie. We are no longer going to use CFA franc, which you control. Within Europe, the war between Ukraine and Russia has also created yet another crisis. It is a crisis that started on the basis of the Russians saying that in 1990, when the then Soviet Union collapsed, you assured Russia and indeed assured those in the East, particularly Russia, that there would be no 1-inch movement to their territory. What has happened since is that you have moved to Poland, you want to move into Georgia, you want to move into Ukraine, and the French are in the forefront. The French and the British, the major colonizers, are in the forefront. And they want to use this as an occasion to reassert themselves. And you hear the very bellicose language that emanates from Macron. You've heard him even in cases when he has had meetings with President Trump of the United States of America. When Trump proposes means and ways of ending the conflict, it is the French and the British since Kim Steimer who are in the front of saying, no, this must not happen in this way. So what started as a conflict between Russia and Ukraine has now become a proxy war in which every other breach is being articulated by Macron as an affront to NATO. And NATO is being invoked from where I sit, and I stand to be corrected, as this body that when you attack one, you attack all, in the belief that the United States of America would come to the aid of Europe if there was a war between Europe and Russia. But the reality is that that is not so very predictable, particularly if you listen to President Trump, who once said, almost jokingly, that there is a big, beautiful ocean between us and Europe, and that we are not going to be the ones that underwrite the cost of NATO. So all those factors conjoined are producing a France that is in a state of confusion, a France that is trying to reassert herself, a France that is trying to say we are the leaders of Europe, and a French leader who is facing rebellion from within, and who in ordinary circumstances ought to have called a general meeting at which his own leadership is being challenged. But of course, we know that the Constitution of France is one that allows for what they call cohabitation, which allows the president to continue in office and only disturbs the prime minister and the political parties. So he is, if I'm allowed to use what would be a very European term, skating on very thin ice. But he must do so because the decks are laid against him, and he has no choice but to appear tough, even if he is trembling inwardly. I personally hold the view that the contradictions within France are so deeply rooted now, and that Macron is the symbol of those deep contradictions, that to use this word figuratively, he can only escape the political guillotine for some time. It may take 1 or 2 years, but I think that ultimately he will be forced out of office, or he will see the wisdom of leaving office. The contradictions are so deep that he cannot afford the luxury of just hanging in there, because sometimes hanging in there is not the solution. But he may also want to stay in power. And if he does, I think he's going to be confronted with situations that are not going to be very pretty. Remember that the economy of France is not as strong as it was several years ago. It no longer has resources to her former colonies. So there'll be a lot of grandstanding going forward. There'll be a lot of gunboat diplomacy. There'll be a lot of alibis. And I think the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is for the moment providing that. Remember the old saying that if you have a problem at home, you create an external enemy. Then you unify the home front. I think Macron is trying to use that. And immigration is one of the things that they are trying to use, that we are doing what we are doing, which is causing you anger and making you angry, because we want to have a France that is controlled from within, a France that is strong. But ironically, what that is doing, it is strengthening the hand of the far right, so that you see Marine Le Pen, if you look at the opinion polling, those who are of the French indigents are leaning towards her because of this scarecrow called the danger of the immigrant.
The leaders will always play them. So we will never get to know what is actually happening when it comes to these people. But all these things are now open for we to see that these people, the way we see them to be, are not who they actually are. They depend on us for survival. Without us, they can't survive. France has fallen simply because 3 nations in Africa kicked it out. That is the power that we have. Look at protests everywhere. The people are crying of hardship, no food to eat, bankruptcy. If the economy is still doing that well, do you think we'll see these people coming to expose them? Whenever you see things happening in these countries, you should know there is something. They say there's no smoke without fire. That is why Professor Lumumba is opening up things to us. What the media will say is what they want us to hear. They will never come out openly, the leaders, to admit, or the journalists to tell us what is actually happening to France. But France is in bankruptcy. France can no longer survive because Africa has decided to move away from France. We have decided to choose other partners. Russia is in the game now. China is in the game now. So what France claims it is, and we are surviving on its messes, is not what it is. We need to wake up. We need to rise up. These people have played us for a very long time. And that is why majority of us are still finding means and ways to defend these people. Because we don't understand what is happening. We expect them to come out openly to tell us that they are suffering before we will now understand that this is what is happening. And that is what I want Africans to wake up. Sometimes when we put up information, you come out and tell us we are misleading you. Simple because you haven't heard them saying this. They always code things, so we need to decode what it is. It's just like when they come out to tell us that Captain Ibrahim Traore is using the resources to protect himself. Did you see Captain Ibrahim Traore doing that? Just like they told us about Muammar Gaddafi. He was a dictator. Did you see Muammar Gaddafi dictating? But because it came out from them, you understood it, which was the negative way. They misled us. But when something is happening to them and they speak in parables and you try to decode to the African, then these our own people will come out defending these people. We need to wake up. Africa is the reason to which these people have power. When you hear these people talking about power, they refer to the resources in Africa. So without our resources, these people will become third world countries. They have nothing to survive. Africa, because we don't control the narrative, our resources, that is why we do not have the power that we need. The day the African will be able to control the resources, will get the power like what we are seeing in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So power is when you have control over your resources, because that is what gives us the power that we need. France cannot survive without us. The West can never survive without the African. And this is what we need to understand. That when they are talking about power, they are talking about the African resources. And it is time for us to rise up to fight for this power, which is our resources. So that's the latest around the world and in Africa.